Hello, welcome to Learnovative Agile and Scrum video series. My name is Vijay Bandaru. I'm a certified Scrum trainer and certified team coach and certified enterprise coach from Scrum Alliance. I create these videos to help everybody understand the concepts of Scrum in an easy, understandable manner so that you can implement them in your Scrum product and project development. So in this video, we are going to cover two topics because they are interconnected. Those two topics are increment and definition of done. So what is an increment? Let's take an analogy here. You see two pictures on the screen. One is a cake and one is a pizza. So a piece of the pizza or a piece of the cake is called as an increment. That means whenever you are building any product, it can be a house or a mobile application or a web application, then an increment is something, a usable piece of the product. For example, if you are building an e-commerce website, then probably you build a small important functionality, a set of features which includes registration, login, search, and add to cart and payment and track the order. These 5 to 6 features together, when they are completed, called as an increment. So usually when you are working with Scrum, you are going to work using sprints. A sprint is a fixed unit of time, usually less than or equal to 1 month. So every sprint, you take some of the prioritized features from the product backlog, which is prioritized by product owner, and you convert that features into an increment. So that means end of every sprint, you will get an increment, a usable, valuable increment will be coming out. So that means an increment can be considered as a concrete step towards a product goal because it helps you to validate whether the increment is coming in line with the product goal or not, whether it is meeting the expectations of the customers or not. And the commitment for the increment is definition of done. That means whatever increment you are creating, it should meet the definition of done at any point of time. So that is the reason we call the definition of done as the commitment for increment, so that it will satisfy the expected quality standards. So let's imagine a 2-week sprint. Usually when you have a 2-week sprint, there will be 10 working days. So first day, half day, you will have sprint planning, because according to Scrum, if you are in a 1-month sprint, maximum 8 hours for sprint planning, shorter for shorter sprints. So first day, roughly half day is reserved for the sprint planning. Last half day, post-lunch session, you'll have review and retrospective. Maybe 2 hours for review and retrospective is for 1.5 hours, because for a 2-week sprint, it is usually shorter compared to the 1-month sprint. According to Scrum Guide, maximum 4 hours for sprint review for 1-month sprint, shorter for shorter sprints. Retrospective 3 hours for maximum 1-month sprint and shorter for shorter sprint. So first half day planning, last half day review retrospective. So let's imagine in the sprint planning, the developers have selected these items into the sprint backlog, which was prioritized by the product owner. Search, list, add to cart, changing the shipping address, and payment using any approach. And then let's imagine the sprint work begins. So let's imagine the search functionality, the search backlog item is done on day 3, maybe around 11 o'clock. So that means the increment will have search. So after that, the list is completed maybe on day 4 around lunch break. Then the increment will have search and list together, integration testing and regression testing, all these things completed. Then maybe add to cart functionality is done on day 6 around evening, maybe around 3 p.m. So this way the increment will have search, list, and add to cart. So then the next item, changing the shipping address is done on day 8, maybe around 11 o'clock. So now the increment will have all these 4 items: search, list, add to cart, and shipping address change. And finally, the last item is completed on the last day, payment, maybe prior to the sprint review. So now the increment will have all these items together, integration tested, regression testing, whatever it is required to call that as done. So search, list, add to cart, shipping address change, and payment. But before going to the sprint review, all these items should be reviewed by the product owner. As and when those items are done throughout the sprint, the product owner should be reviewing these items and give a acceptance or rejection. But when you go to the sprint review on the last working day, the consolidated cohesive increment will be taken into sprint review to get the feedback from the stakeholders. It will be helpful to get a consolidated cohesive feedback. At the same time, Scrum doesn't stop you to deploy this functionality alone, search, or these 2 functionalities, search and list together, or these 3 functionalities together, or these 4 functionalities together, or these 5 functionalities together into the production before going to the sprint review. That means the primary purpose of the sprint review is to get the feedback, but not to get a formal approval or rejection. So that way, Scrum implements the Agile Manifesto principle number 1, which is our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software by allowing deploying into the production any point of time without waiting for the sprint review. Now let's look at some important points related to increment. So first point, who creates the increment? The developers will create the increment by doing the required work. Like if it is a software product, then doing the required work, understanding the requirements, architecture, database, design, coding, validations, testing, integration, all these things working together called as creating the increment. So developers will take care of it. And the product owner decides when to release an increment into the production. So by coordinating, collaborating with the developers and the stakeholders. So it doesn't mean that at the end of every sprint, whatever increment you are creating, it need not be deployed into the production always. As long as you are creating potentially shippable increment, Scrum supports frequent release, late release, or no release. So, but the product owner will look for the right time, right opportunity to decide when to release the increment into production. So what parameters that will help the product owner? These are the parameters. Value. Will the new increment create any additional value to the customers or users or stakeholders? Quality. Is it meeting the quality standards? Market conditions. Are they favorable enough to create a new increment or launch a new increment? Or the end user expectations. Are they really expecting a new version? All these parameters or any other parameters like regulatory compliance or legal approvals, considering those parameters into consideration, the product owner will make a call in collaboration with the developers and the stakeholders. Then you have a formal opportunity in the sprint, which is called a sprint review, one of the Scrum events, to get the formal feedback from the stakeholders. So that formal feedback at the end of every sprint will help you to create a continuous, frequent feedback on the increment, which will help for the Scrum team to ensure that they are building the right product. So if the feedback is delayed, then obviously it will increase the cost of change and increase the probability of bringing a wrong product to the stakeholders. So the sprint review is important. We have another video which explains how to conduct the sprint review and what are some tips to conduct the sprint review interactive engaging. Please watch that video. Now let's talk about definition of done. So what is definition of done? Definition of done is a formal checklist related to the quality standards. We can consider it as a quality standard checklist. So it is also considered as a commitment to the increment. That means any item in the product backlog, before you allow it to be part of the increment, it should satisfy the definition of done. That is why definition of done is the commitment to the increment. Now, who creates the definition of done? the whole Scrum team, which includes the product owner, developers, and all the developers and Scrum Master, will create the definition of done before the first sprint. That means before starting the sprinting of the product. So all of them will sit together and then collectively, collaboratively create the definition of done created by the Scrum team. And a formal opportunity for the Scrum team to inspect and adopt the definition of done is the retrospective, sprint retrospective. So that means it will be created in the beginning. Every sprint retrospective, they will inspect and adopt the definition of done in order to ensure that more stringent policies or checklist will be added time to time based on the need. Now, developers are required to conform to the definition of done or adhere to the definition of done. What does that mean? Whenever any item is done during the sprint, then it is the responsibility of the developers to ensure all the criteria agreed within the definition of done completely matching or satisfying to the item before they call it as done and before they even show it to the product owner. That is how they maintain the quality of the increment they are building. And another important point we need to remember about the increment definition of done is, if the organization has any quality standards at the org level, then every Scrum team or all the Scrum teams working in the organization should consider that quality standard as a minimum criteria in their definition of done. On top of that, if they have any specific definition of done criteria required for the product they're building, they can add it anyway. That means, for example, if the organization quality standard say for every 5,000 kilo lines of code, there should not be any more than one critical bug or two severity 1 bugs like that, they should be make it part of their definition of done. And another point, while there are multiple teams working on the same product, sometimes when they are building a large product, it is possible to have multiple teams because there is a limitation on the Scrum team, less than or equal to 10, including product owner and developers. So when they are building large teams, obviously instead of putting more people into Scrum team and make it more complex, you can have multiple Scrum teams within less than or equal to 10. So in that case, all the teams should have mutually agreed to define and comply a common definition of done. So what happens is, whenever any team is building any item and before it make it part of the increment, it will satisfy the mutually agreed common definition of done. So the quality of the increment created by all these teams together will follow the same quality standards. Hence, all the teams working on the same product should mutually define and comply to a same or common definition of done. Then, a sample definition of done. Let's look at a sample definition of done. It is considering a software development product, could be a mobile application or a web application. So it looks like this. All acceptance criteria for each item must pass, and then coding should be completed for that item, and code unit testing is done, and unit test cases are automated, and code review is done by somebody in the team. Review feedback is implemented, documentation related to that item is done, functional testing is done, and 0 severity 1 or severity 2 defects. That means all the severity 1, 2 defects are fixed, and regression testing done, integration testing done, load testing or performance testing is done, browser compatibility testing is done, like maybe Safari or Chrome browser compatibility, web versus mobile testing complete done, and PO review done, and UAT done. Let's imagine this is a definition of done. So any item that the team is building within a sprint, the developer should ensure all these points are meeting or satisfied for every item before they call it a done. And few important points related to definition of done. First one, definition of done may vary product to product. So for example, if you are building a house or you are building a physical product like a car, then these two may have different definition of done criteria. Similarly, definition of done may be different for different domains. For example, you are building a product related to healthcare versus e-commerce. Then both the domain related products may have different definition of done. And another important point, if any item doesn't satisfy the definition of done, then it cannot be part of the increment. That means it is not allowed to be part of the increment. Rather, it is moved to the product backlog according to the product owner's priority. So that way, the existing functionality of the increment quality is protected always. And fourth point, DOD is Boolean. That means it is either done or not done, nothing in between. 99.9% is not done. It is considered to be not done. And DOD is not static. As we discussed earlier, Scrum team will always inspect and adapt the definition of done during the sprint retrospective to ensure it is stronger and more stringent quality criteria is added as the product is more evolving. So that is why definition of done is not static. They may not change every sprint, but every sprint retrospective, they quickly review, inspect and adapt whether the current definition of done is strong enough, stringent enough or not. And as and when it is required, they will add some new criteria. And what is a weak definition of done? A weak definition of done is a kind of vague or incomplete or inconsistently applied checklist of criteria used to determine whether a product backlog item is truly done or not. So I'll give one of my experiences as an enterprise agile coach. I was coaching a team a few years back. So the team had an item. All sorts of testing should be completed as part of their definition of done. Then I asked the product owner, what do you understand from this line item in your definition of done? All sorts of testing should be done. He said, the product owner said, unit testing, functional testing, regression testing, integration testing, performance testing, browser compatibility testing, operating system compatibility testing, web versus mobile compatibility testing. I asked the same thing to the developers. What is your understanding about this line item in your definition of done? All sorts of testing should be done. The developer said unit testing, functional testing, performance testing, and integration testing. So there is a clear gap. That is what is called vague or inconsistently created. So I helped them to redefine their definition of done. Instead of keeping as a vague statement, I asked them what are all the things should be done as part of the testing, individual line items. So it created more transparency. So another point related to weak definition of done is it lacks the rigor and clarity needed to ensure quality, completeness, and shippability of the increment the Scrum team is creating. So let's see an example of the weak definition of done. Imagine a Scrum team ideally is supposed to do this much work as part of their definition of done. So it looks like this: all acceptance test must pass, coding is done, unit testing is done, automation done, functional testing is done, zero defects, documentation is done for the item, regression testing is done, integration testing is done, and operating system testing is done, web versus mobile compatibility testing, load testing or performance testing, live testing. All these are ideal definition of done. So we can consider this as an ideal definition of done. That means when the team does all these things, then that increment can be called as done, useful and valuable. This is ideal definition of done. For example, due to any infrastructure issues or team knowledge issues or tools issues, they have selected only till here. So this is called as a weak definition of done. That means anything less than actually supposed to do as part of the definition of done is called as a weak definition of done. So what is the problem with having weak definition of done? If you start building more features with weak definition of done, eventually the possible consequences are, these are the possible consequences: low product quality, lack of transparency, frequent rework for the items that are already completed, because you are making them done without really truly doing the done part, and delayed releases or erosion of the trust or impacts the velocity. So these are some negative consequences of weak definition of done. So if you are working as a product owner or a Scrum Master, my recommendation will be, instead of building more features with the weak definition of done, I would encourage you to bridge this gap as soon as possible in the upcoming sprints. That means if the knowledge is a problem, then build the knowledge to the team. If tools are a problem, then talk to the management and get the required tools. If infrastructure is a problem, then help the team to build the infrastructure. So that is how you need to build the missing elements in the definition of done and bridge the gap and make it as a ideal or stronger definition of done. Now let's look at what is the difference between definition of done and acceptance criteria. These are more synonymously used, but they are not exactly same. That's why I wanted to just give you a quick differentiation by taking these aspects. So these are the aspects I'm going to differentiate for acceptance criteria and definition of done. So purpose of acceptance criteria to describe the functional conditions of a PBI. PBI means product backlog item. Whereas the purpose of definition of done is to ensure overall quality of the total increment that is getting created in the sprint. Now, scope of the acceptance criteria is too specific to the single product backlog item. That means the acceptance criteria is applicable and specific to a particular product backlog item. Whereas the scope of the definition of done applies to the entire product backlog and is a commitment to the increment. And who defines the acceptance criteria? Product owner defines the acceptance criteria based on the inputs received from stakeholders. And the definition of done is collectively or collaboratively decided by the whole Scrum team. As we discussed earlier, if organization has a quality standards, then the team should make that as a minimum definition of done. On top of that, they can add any criteria. If there is no organizational standard, then the team can add whatever is required definition of done by collectively discussing. What is the focus of the acceptance criteria? The focus of acceptance criteria on user needs and the business functionality and requirements, whereas the focus of definition of done is on technical quality and completeness of the increment. And coming to the testability, the acceptance criteria is used for the product backlog item level validation, usually done by the product owner. So once any item is done during the sprint, the developers first they verify the definition of done, and then they call the product owner. Hey, product owner, this item is done. Can you quickly check and confirm? So using the acceptance criteria, the product owner quickly validates the item and give approval or rejection to the developers. Whereas the testability of the definition of done is used for the system level completeness at the increment level. And the format for acceptance criteria, you can use a gherkin format like given, when, then. Given a condition is met, when a trigger is happening, then this is the result should happen. So that is gherkin format. So if you use the gherkin format to write the acceptance criteria, they can be automatically converted into automated unit test cases, which will save a lot of developers' time. So I would recommend you to write acceptance criteria in this format, and it's very easy to follow. Or even a simple bullet list, which explains the functional criteria of the product backlog item. Whereas the definition of done, you can use a simple bullet list. When I was working as a Scrum Master or Agile coach, I used to create a definition of done by taking a big flip chart. Every item with a clearly defined bullet point, less ambiguous, very clear, crystal clear, transparent, and stick that post-it flip chart into the area where everybody in the Scrum team can easily access and read it always. So in an area, so that the definition of done create more transparency to the entire Scrum team. Then reviewed on acceptance criteria is reviewed in general during the product backlog refinement or sprint planning for the items in the product backlog, whereas the definition of done is continuously reviewed throughout the sprint for every item done by the developers. So in general, what happens is once the sprint planning is done, the developers start implementing one by one items in the sprint backlog. So when an item is done, the developers, whoever is working on that particular product backlog item, they will go to the checklist of the definition of done. They will verify all the items individually according to the checklist. When they realize all items are satisfied, then they call the product owner and then they show it using the acceptance criteria. The product owner will quickly review it. Once product owner signs off, the item will be considered as done and the status is updated to done. And then the developers will update the sprint progress using the burn up or burn down chart. So that's how it will continuously review definition of done for each backlog item throughout the sprint. Then result if not met. If the acceptance criteria is not met, then the PBI is considered to be not complete. If the definition of done is not met, then the increment is considered not done. Then let's look at an example for acceptance criteria. For example, user can reset password via email link. That can be an acceptance criteria for a change password. Then the definition of done could be coding done, unit testing done, code review completed, and zero defects, and integration testing, any performance testing or regression testing, something like that. So in simple terminology, acceptance criteria is related to the functionality and specific to individual product backlog item, whereas the definition of done is related to the entire product backlog and a commitment for increment. Acceptance criteria is usually defined by the product owner. Definition of done is created by Scrum team. And acceptance criteria is used to validate the items as and when it is done by the product owner. And definition of done is used to validate the completeness of the increment and the items done by the developers throughout the sprint. I hope you liked this video. If you have liked it, please subscribe to our channel to get more like these videos. And also share this video to your friends. And in case you are looking for any Agile or Scrum or SAFe or AI trainings, we conduct all the Scrum Alliance trainings, which include Certified Scrum Master, Advanced Courses of Scrum Master, and Certified Scrum Product Owner and Advanced Product Owner courses. All SAFe trainings include SAFe Agile, SAFe PO, PM, SAFe Scrum Master, and AI for Scrum Master and AI for Product Owner we have recently launched, and they are picking up. To elevate your career as a Scrum Master or Product Owner, I strongly encourage to take up our trainings related to AI for Scrum Master and Product Owner. And this is our information, email ID, password, email ID and phone number, and our website also. You can contact us for any of your future training needs or consulting services needs. Thank you so much and have a great time.